What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video, and this video is actually not my own work. It is actually the work done by Nefas QS. Some of you guys may know him just as played Nefas. He is one of the new class reps, and I believe it was yesterday as of the recording of this video that he went on the PTS for 3 hours to basically do various different raids to kind of test out the healing changes, as you can see here from the title of this forum post here. So basically he and 11 other people just kind of went on the PTS, did a couple of the harder trials to kind of really test the chops with the healers and kind of see where healing stands on the PTS right now. So this is with the changes, so springs don't stack, only one orb at a time. The orb can be synergized as many times as it wants and it won't disappear, things like that. And he also decided to give his own thoughts. So he linked his own YouTube video on this. Is about half an hour long, so I will put that down in the description below for you guys who kind of want to see the whole thing. He also did stream it on Twitch, so I will also have a link down below to his Twitch channel so you guys can see the whole 3 hours if that's what you are interested in seeing, the actual fights. I believe he was on a healer. The one thing I will point out though is that he didn't have passives because he was using a template and completely forgot to add in passives, so just bear that in mind when you take a look at all the videos here. But if you don't want to watch the whole 30 minutes, he kind of gave a summary here, and we'll quickly go through what the post currently has in terms of responses and things like that, just so you guys can get an idea of what other healers might be thinking about this. So his conclusions are, he has 5 main points here. So the first one is that the healer playstyle, so this is the playstyle of the healers, how you play as a healer, regardless of class, is simple, straightforward, boring. There's not much room for skill play, nor a semblance of a skill ceiling anymore, as the playstyle is too generic. Now, I will point out here that Nefas is not a healer main. I believe he was a tank main at some point. He also does have DPS, but very much like me, he does have experience across all 3 roles. However, again, healing is not his primary role in trials. Usually it's normally a tank, from what I recall. It's either tank or DPS, so healing is kind of like his third best role here. But he is saying right now, and I'm sure he also talked with a bunch of the other healers who were also on this raid, that for their opinions, and I'm guessing their general opinion is that it is very boring now because you don't orb spam anymore. You only have 1 orb at a time, so you can just put out 1 orb. The rest of the time is basically spent doing who knows what. Again, I'm not a healer main, so I wouldn't really know at this point. He does note though that a new playstyle does open up new possibilities, new raid play, new builds and compositions for healers or raid teams who wish to completely forgo traditional healers. Again, this playstyle is because you can only have 1 spring out at a time, you can only have 1 orb out at a time. So now you have pretty much opened up a lot of global cooldowns, which really opens up the playing field a little bit when it comes to what you're able to put down. You can put down burst heals, you can put down more support roles, you can put down more synergies for better alcosh uptimes, things like that. And he also mentions that you might be able to make new builds, make new compositions for teams that will kind of eschew the traditional 2 healers, 2 tanks, 8 DPS. I know on Tuck's raiding environment in Discord that there is discussion that, hey, with how strong Vigor is, assuming that Vigor doesn't change between now and when it's released, you might not even need a second healer anymore. You might just need another stamina DPS who's just wearing powerful assault and using Vigor every once in a while. 3, the healer role is further excluded from content if changes as is go live. I believe he's probably referring more to 4-man content rather than 12-man content, because you will obviously need healers in 12-man content. But even now in 4-man content, healers are kind of optional. A lot of dungeons nowadays, a lot of 4-man content, you don't really need a healer. So Black Rose Prison, for example, one of the hardest 4-man content in the game right now, there are teams who are able to do it with 3 DPS and 1 tank, no healer required whatsoever. A lot of the DLC dungeons, Scalecaller Peak comes to mind, Fang Lair comes to mind, you don't need a healer. It just becomes so much easier when you add in an additional DPS to help burn through certain mechanics, that we can skip mechanics and things like that. So on 4-man content, healers have already sort of been optional, so to speak, but this third point here that it raises pretty much makes them pretty much obsolete, more or less, in 4-man content. Just bring a 3 stamina DPS, their vigors are more than enough self-heals to get them through stuff. In terms of 12-man content, I already mentioned that people are already thinking, hey, with vigor being so strong, you might not even need a second dedicated healer anymore. You might just need a 9th DPS slash buff bitch. I mean, that's that's the direction that the game seems to be going based on this third point here. Point 4, which is kind of weird, considering the previous 3 points. The orb change, which is the multiple synergies off of the one orb, and other changes such as the budding seeds, now having a heal over time, barrier, now hitting 12 people, are absolutely fantastic. So this seems a little bit weird because the change to healer play style is because of the orb changes and because of the other changes that they've made, but that doesn't. But they are not mutually exclusive. So you can always say that the orb change that was made, the multiple synergies off of one orb, is a great change, even though it does make the play style changes the play style a little bit. They're two kind of separate things, so they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So just gotta keep that in mind here. I do agree with that assessment though, that the changes that they have made so far to healers is generally speaking a good change. I still don't think one orb is necessarily the right way to go about this, or one spring is the necessarily best way to go about this, but the changes themselves that they made to kind of alleviate some of the downsides of it, they're for the most part pretty good. And finally, the 5th point. Healing is still fine for most content except for 2 fights. He notes Halls of Fabrication Hard Mode Execute and Sunspire Lakesti's Hard Mode. But the level of healing needed for most content doesn't need to be delegated to actual healers, and you won't really need actual healers to do serious healing as of the PTS Week 3, which only exacerbates point number 3, which is that healer roles are further excluded from content. So this was kind of what we were expecting, that Hall's Hard Mode Execute and Lakesti's Hard Mode, because of the massive amount of damage that's coming in, Hard Mode Execute from all the missiles that are coming down, the AoEs, and Sunspire Lakesti's Hard Mode because of the static charge, that the healers will need to work a little bit harder once this change goes live compared to how it is on live right now. Because on live right now, you just spam a bunch of orbs, you just spam a couple of springs, and you're good to go. But obviously, you can't do that on the PTS, so it's a little bit of a challenge for progression groups. You guys are basically going to need to completely rethink your strategy for Hard Mode Execute and Lakesti's Hard Mode as well. Now, some of these changes might be pretty straightforward. It might just be, hey, put down an orb, maybe get the tanks that are thrown out an orb as well, so that way you have 4 orbs going. Some changes might be a little bit simpler, but this is definitely a chance for progression groups to kind of think about new strategies for those 2 fights, assuming nothing changes between now and when the patch goes live. He also has a link to the ESO logs, and again, his full video is on the Twitch, the entire stream itself. Now, going through some of the comments here, I did go through these earlier, and there are some really great comments, but there are also some really questionable comments as well. The first thing here is Cyril Durzam is basically saying that he has one suggestion, which is basically to more or less nerf. It's here in this post here. Basically, just nerf self heals, which is one thing to do. So he's saying that make the self heals a little bit weaker. Take all the group buffs and debuffs from damage healers and put them all to healers. That way the healers are the only ones responsible for buffs and debuffs. So things like, let's say, Minor Savagery from Nightblades, they might just be put on some sort of healer line or something, rather than just being a class passive. So that way you just have a Nightblade tank and you get the Minor Savagery, which is not a bad idea. It's just would be very difficult to implement because, hey, what's stopping a damage dealer from still running that skill, or a tank from running that skill? Nightblade tanks, like, let's say, like, you attach Minor Savagery to the group on, let's say, Refreshing Path. What stops a tank from running Refreshing Path rather than a healer? Or, for example, on Wardens, let's say, Wardens have minor toughness. Templars, like, let's say you attach Minor Sorcery to the Clappy heal. What's stopping a Templar tank from just bringing Templar tank and just saying, hey, just do that instead? So while it is a good idea, it's sort of hard to implement. I can't really see a good way to implement this without potentially kind of still running into the same problem. And so the other thing he suggests is just get rid of the healer spec, just make it damage healers or tanks, and leave the rest of the staff as a backup utility weapon. That is just, it's not a good idea. You still want to have that sort of choice there. Moving on here, so Nightingale 707, so basically says that, so he's just basically saying that use Echoing Vigor, currently, and should be getting through beam phase. The thing is, Vigor does not stack on each other, so if you have 2 people running Echoing Vigor, you won't get 2 stacks of Echoing Vigor, you just refresh the duration of Echoing Vigor, so you can't exactly do that. As far as I know, on live, I think Echoing and Resolve Vigor do stack on each other, but I'm not 100% certain if that's the way right now on the PTS either, because I haven't really tested that out yet. But Still, you have to kind of keep in mind though that you kind of have to compare it to other heals as well, because vigor does tick every 2 seconds, and I believe static ticks every second. So your vigor basically needs to out heal however much static is doing, plus whatever the healers are doing on top of you. So it is possible, I think, if you have somebody doing echoing vigor, to kind of get through it. But if I recall correctly, because I didn't watch the entire stream, I believe Nefas and Code both said that they were not able to heal through Lakessi's hard mode that way. He mentioned that he didn't use a defensive ultimate to give major protection. The problem with this is he gives a couple examples here. So Nightblade Veil, Ward, and Northern Storm. The problem is those have a limited radius. So Nightblade Veil is only 5 meters, Northern Storm is only 8 meters, and that's not enough to cover everybody who needs to be protected by static. You could potentially get everybody into there. Northern Storm can definitely work because Circle of Protection certainly hits everybody without static overlapping just barely, and that's 5 meters. So you could potentially get Northern Storm to work. Veil would be just as tricky as Circle of Protection. So kind of a little bit tricky there to get that major protection. He also mentions that DPS didn't run Meditate, which doesn't make much sense. So Meditate basically means you can't do anything, just heals you, and you get major protection if you have that Psijic Order line, so you would have to run through all the Psijic Order quests. I believe the major protection passive is actually the last one you unlock, so you need to get 10 Psijic, which doesn't make much sense, as a DPS at least. Plus, for progression groups at least, I'm sure you guys have seen Mayflower's runs. If we lose even a single DPS, we still have to DPS down the Storm Atronachs. So you kind of can't afford to do that, especially in the higher end groups that are running for speed, going for Godslayer especially. You can't give up that DPS by running Meditate. So that's just not going to happen for a lot of groups that are progressing hard mode, that are progressing Godslayer. So again, he's saying that Lakessi hard mode would be doable. As far as I know, they did not manage to do Lakessi's hard mode. Let me double check the log real fast, but I believe they didn't manage to clear it. Let's see. Yeah, they did not manage to clear Lakessi's hard mode. You can see here they didn't manage to get through. Let's see what their longest one was. 213. Yes, they did manage to. Let's see. Yeah, so they did manage to get through the static a couple of times, so they did manage to get through it, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people made it through. See, they got 1 dead from static here, a couple of other, 2 more here from static, so they were able to get through static, but they were not able to clear hard mode, so don't know what that person is talking about. These are not necessarily bad players. Like, these are really endgame players. You have Nefas, you have Code. I see a couple other people, Tor, Bojingle. Like, these guys really know their stuff. And if they can't get through Lakessi's hard mode, I don't think the average progression group is going to be able to get through Lakessi's hard mode either here. Let's see here. I believe there was a really good post here by Code. Yeah, so Code has a really solid post. I won't go through all of it, but I highly recommend checking this out and reading through all of it, because Code does make a very good points here. Basically, the idea is they are basically balancing healers as though they're DPS or tanks, or I should say DPS, which is not really what you want to do, because DPS, healers and tanks / support roles, completely different playstyles, completely different utilities. So DPS is just a raw numbers game. What are the abilities that will give me the best DPS? Versus healers and tanks, where our real focus is how much utility can provide for the group. And so one of the examples he points out here is the standardization for springs. They want to standardize all AoE pots or dots. You can't place Endless Hail multiple places, so you can't place springs multiple places, which seems fine on the surface. But if you think about it from a utilitarian point of view, it just completely kills the utility of that move. You can only put it down once, and that's it. And it sort of kills the overall utility. He also points out that the whole orb spam, basically, there's no reason for a healer to run around orbs anymore, because you can only have 1 orb out at a time, so a tank can just shoot out an orb and you're done. The orb was really great for healing, but mainly it was used for the synergy, for the additional resources. So if the tank just shoots out an orb, that's it. It just has to shoot out 1 every 20 or so seconds. Easily doable on a tank. Even a DPS could do it with the Necrotic Orb Morph, Mystic Orb Morph. Does a pretty good amount of damage as a magic DPS. We'll do a video on that in a little bit, probably towards the middle of next week. But Mystic Orbs you just have to shoot one out, and hey, you got the synergy, and plus you do a lot of DPS with it with the synergy itself. So, kind of taking out this orb spam, does it really do anything for healers besides completely gutting them? What's the design decision behind it? He also points out that the group healing potential for stamina DPS has increased. Bringer Preservation, he said, was about 2 to 2.5k heals per second. Vigor was 2.5 to 3k heals done per second. Illustrious Healing was about 3k per second. So, what does that mean? So, to in general. So, why have a dedicated healer when you could just have stamina DPS run Echoing Vigor? Just have one stamina DPS run Echoing Vigor, put them in like Powerful Assault, so that way you can take the set and put a different set on one of the tanks, perhaps, or take a set off of the healer, perhaps. Just run Ring of Preservation from a stamina DPS, like really, just like have stamina DPS be buff, bitch. You don't need a second healer anymore. So that's kind of what he's saying here. Again, it's a really, really great post. It's really long, but I highly recommend reading it through in its entirety. Code has always done really solid posts about this kind of stuff in the past, so I highly recommend just checking it out and reading through it yourself here. The code also just points out that the suggestions that Nightingale made out wouldn't work for VHOF hard mode. They might work for Lacassi's hard mode, but not for VHOF hard mode, which makes sense. VHOF hard mode is they execute stacks, are typically speaking much more spread out than the 5 meters for Lacassi's static hard mode. And then, of course, with VHOF hard mode, you can't use meditate because you're an execute. You gotta kill it before the damage becomes too much. The exhaustion, stage 2 exhaustion, pretty a lot of damage, especially if the PTS go through. You might not be able to heal through all of that. So basically just a little bit of back and forth between Nightingale and some other people, just kind of discussing overall healing, things like this. And generally speaking, everyone's just saying thanks for doing all this on the PTS, especially because it is kind of hard to get a group of people on the DPS here, on the PTS, I should say. So yeah. So, Reborn Zombie, who was another class rep, one of the new class reps, was also on that run. She mains a DPS, Stamina Nightblade, I believe. She did point out that they did try a couple of things on Lacassi's hard mode. She reiterates that multiple Echoing Vigors do not stack with each other, so only ground-based AoE heals will stack. So Ring of Protection with Resolving Vigor would actually work up better than Echoing with Ring of Preservation. And then she also points out that Meditate gives you 30% mitigation from major protection, but it also said it's a channel, so you can't block, so which is 50% mitigation. So trade-off doesn't really make that much sense here, like if you're trying to meditate or things like that. With static, you could potentially meditate through it because you can't block an AoE, but at the same time, it doesn't make much sense to do that. But moving on here, I believe Nefas also does point out a couple other things here on one of his posts here. Yes. So he does clarify the whole orb change thing. So he says orb changes is fine in actual gameplay, though there are large implications that stem from it. So again, they're not mutually exclusive kind of thing. He also points out that for the, this is Nightingale 707 who's saying, why don't you try this in Lacassi's hard mode? He said that he was just saying that they had minor protection, all the heal over times with much more spell damage on healers compared to on live, because now you don't need to spec as heavily into magical regen because you're not spamming orbs anymore. They had igneous shields from the tanks, they had major ward, major resolve, probably from Warden, running expansive frost cloak, they had barriers, they had every stamina DPS running circular protection and vigor, and more. And he even mentioned that with all that, Lacassi's beam was too much. I mean, you just saw it on one poll, they lost 3 people to the static, which is a lot of people in hard mode. I mean, if you guys have seen the Mayflower runs, losing 2 to 3 people by itself is already pretty difficult to recover from on Lacassi's hard mode, just from that first beam. He also has the same reaction with the whole meditate thing. And he mentions here that no pair of healers from live can heal Lacassi's hard mode on PTS right now. And again, this is Nefas. He was part of Mechanically Challenged. He raid leads Sempiternal Way, which is a very, very good guild in terms of PvE stuff. And everybody who was on that team I recognize a lot of the names as very, very solid players. If they can't get through Lakazoo's hard mode, there's no way a progression guild can get through it. I mean, again, these are some of the best players in the game. Coach from Night Fighters, Nefas is a mechanically challenged. I believe Bojangles is actually mechanically challenged. I'm mechanically challenged. So there's a Tor is a very solid player. You know, if these guys can't get through it, what makes you think your group can? A progression group can. So, you know, that's kind of what's going on here. And on the second page, I don't think there's not much else here to really discuss. So yeah, that's basically how it is on PTS right now, from Nefas' point of view. And I have not done any healing testing, again, because I don't heal main. I don't really heal unless absolutely necessary. Like, I might have a few healing streams that you guys might see on my channel, but again, they're very, very rare compared to DPSing and tanking. So I can't really fully comment on the healing changes, and I would trust Nefas and Code and Reborn Zombie, Bojangle, Tor, all these people, Ozlo, Tabata, like those people really know what they're talking about when it comes to healing, especially Tabata and Nefas. So I would probably defer to them when it comes to the healing changes, but even I, as a non-healer main, can tell that these changes, if they go through, is pretty much going to be gutting healers in 12-man content. I wouldn't be surprised if it just ended up being 8 DPS, 1 DPS / buff bitch, 1 healer, 2 tanks. I wouldn't be surprised if that became the norm for trials if these changes go live as is. So again, link in the description below to the video, 30-minute long video on his YouTube channel, the actual Twitch 3-hour-long Twitch stream, as well as this forum post here. So please, if you guys want any more information, just be sure to check out those 3 links below. Hope you guys found this video informative. If you guys have any questions at all or comments about the healing stuff, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I will get them to Nefas or one of the class reps on Toxic Rating Environment. I will also have a link in the description below to the Toxic Rating Environment Discord if you guys also just want to join there and give feedback directly to Nefas and other high-end PvE players. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.